and welcome to everybody who is listening in, and a very warm welcome to the panelists who have graciously accepted our invitation to be here today. I would like to say 2 words about how this webinar will pan out, how it has been designed. What we have is that we've got 4 persons who are going to participate besides myself, and we have 2 persons who are representing the arts and humanities communities. Now, this is a webinar which is especially dedicated to the arts and humanities, and therefore we especially chose 2 people who we thought could amply represent these communities. We have Stefan Belishki, who has been teaching at the Department of Conservation and Restoration at the National Academy of Art in Sofia since 1995. He is currently head of department, and he is his professional interests are easel paintings and wall paintings conservation, history and theory of conservation, technical art history, material study and investigation. He has worked on several national and international research projects. Stefan is also a delegate of the Association of Conservator Restorers in Bulgaria to the European Confederation of Conservator Restorers organization, known as ECHO, and is also vice president of ECHO. So a special welcome to Stefan. And then we have Dr. Joan Abela, who is representing the researchers, the historians, the archivists. She is a senior lecturer at the Department of Legal History and Research Methods at the Faculty of Laws at the University of Malta, and is president of the Notarial Archives Foundation. She read history at the University of Malta and proceeded to read for a PhD in maritime history at the University of Exeter. Joan is a member of the National Archives Board and the Cathedral Archives Board. In 2018, she was made member of the National Order of Merit by the government of Malta for her role in promoting and preserving Malta's paper heritage. So we have Joan here, who's representing the archivists, researchers, the librarians. And then we've got 2 very, very well-known heritage scientists who are here to help us with the queries which will be raised by both Stefan and Joan. We have Costanza Miliani, who many of you already know, but I will introduce once again, who is principal investigator of regional, national, and European projects in heritage science, and currently coordinator elected of the European mobile platform MoLab, and the national coordinator of the Italian node of E-RIHS. She is member of the executive board of the Center of Excellence, SMART, which is Scientific Methodologies Applied to Archaeology and Art, of the University of Perugia, and the scientific board of the Center of Scientific Studies in the Arts of Northwestern University in Chicago. Mattia, on the other hand, Matthias Sterlich is a professor of analytical chemistry at University of Ljubljana and professor of heritage science at University College London. He is one of 2 co-leads of the IPERION HS Heritage Macromolecular Lab, Fix Lab, and HS Academy lead. So a warm welcome once again to everybody, including the persons who are listening in. And I would like to invite Stefan to actually now give us his thoughts and his questions related to transnational access and analysis of, in his case, easel paintings. Stefan.
Thank you, Joanne, and thank you all of you who are on this webinar. It's really a pleasure for me to be with you and to share my questions and thoughts. And I will present now an academic project briefly, and we'll ask some questions related with it. And for this, I'm going to share my screen. In 2020, our Department of Conservation Restoration at the National Academy of Arts in Sofia was asked by the Museum of the Academy to study and conserve a painting by the famous Bulgarian artist Ivan Mrkvička. The painting is a portrait of Maria Luisa, Princess Consort of Bulgaria. It is dated circa 1895-1897 and is one of the important items of the museum's collection. The study was focused mostly on non-invasive techniques, predominantly, multispectral imaging, analysis with portable FTIR, and also handheld XRF. We also took samples from the tucking margins of the painting, and these were samples from the ground layer and also from paint from the brushstrokes laying there, and we analyzed them with XRD. Other techniques we used in the study include also microscopy techniques and microchemical analysis. Our next step after completing the analysis was to compare the results with existing analysis of other paintings of the artist, and we addressed the National Gallery in Sofia, which is known to keep approximately 30 paintings of Mrkvička. We found, however, that no study of these paintings was carried out to date, and we started a small-scale pilot project to obtain information on the palette of 2 paintings from the gallery's permanent exhibition. We now find it important to extend the study of the National Gallery collection and to build then a database of the results open to the public. However, very few scientists in Bulgaria specialize in the field of conservation, and cooperation with international experts will be important for the study, for our future study, and for its success. And this is why I have my questions to IPERION HS. My first question is, can a systematic study of the paintings in the National Gallery in Sofia be carried out as an open access project? The focus is going to be on non-invasive techniques, as sampling will be limited, if permitted at all. There are also paintings of this artist outside Bulgaria, mostly in the Czech Republic. My second question is, how can we obtain information on the palette of the paintings with IPERION HS? We are mostly interested in the pigments, gesso and canvas, but we may also extend the study to include binding media and varnishes, although we know very well that the artist worked mostly in oil. As I mentioned before, we intend eventually to set up a database. And my third question, or rather this is more a thought, is related with one of the aims of our study, and it is to help establishing the authenticity of a number of paintings where this is in doubt, paintings both from galleries and from private collections. So these are my questions, and I'll be glad to hear your comments. But before I stop the presentation, I would like to mention some of the analytical techniques we consider helpful for our future study. And these may include XRF mapping or micro-Raman spectroscopy, if possible to have a portable device of such analytical technique. And we also believe that external XRD analysis will be very important to compare the results of our study carried out to the moment. Thank you again.
Thank you very much, Stefan, for your interesting questions and your beautiful portraits. I would like to ask Costanza to take up the first questions. Costanza?
Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon to our guest and to Stefan for this wonderful presentation. If you don't mind, I will start from the second question. So, which technique are within the MOLA platform the right method to answer your very important question? So first of all, about the palette, we have a number of methods. Some of them you already mentioned it, that are important for the identification of a palette of an artist. So for example, X-ray fluorescence mapping, we have in a portable version. We have actually two different systems depending on the size of the painting and the type of spatial resolution that is needed. We have also the X-ray diffraction mapping system that can give the feature of the crystalline compound on the surface on a mapping fashion. Of course, it's also possible to have Raman spectroscopy, not in the micro setup, but macro setup. That is typically the setup chosen for a portable version. And then also a number of hyperspectral imaging in the VIS, near and far near range. So regarding the systematic study, regarding the binding media and varnishes, this is possible in hyperspectral imaging or point analysis, is of course constrained by the capacity of a spectroscopic method. So it is possible to identify the macro class, chemical class of a binding media, for example, protein, oil, wax, not go farther in the identification of the type of oil, the type of wax, or the type of protein. And similarly also for the varnish. What about a systematic study? Here we have a constraint of time and a constraint of organization of the transnational access according to the European rule. So typically we have a travel or a in situ campaign of about 5 days, and typically according to our experience for the painting you have just shown, we may be able to analyze something like 5, 6 paintings in a very in-depth way. So in the case you have to have information of a larger number of paintings, as I guess from your presentation, this imply one proposal at one call and then another proposal to another call. We have not yet set up a system of long-term proposal. This is under study on an organizational point of view for the future E-RIHS organization. So we understand that this is important for a research, so to have a larger amount of time for a project, but is not yet available now. And now I leave the floor to Mattia for answering to the third question. Please, Mattia.
Thank you very much, Costanza, and thank you also from me, Stefan. These were absolutely magnificent paintings, and I enjoyed the images a lot. Your last question was about the final aim of your research, which is to establish the authenticity of some of the paintings. This is a little bit contradictory in terms of how public funding is used for the purpose of research in research infrastructures. And it is it has been this particular issue of authentication has been discussed within the ethics committee of the preparatory phase of the European Research Infrastructure Heritage Science. And it has been decided that authentication is not an activity that the research infrastructure can support, again, for ethical reasons. One of the reasons is that such authentication studies could affect the market value of paintings, and the research infrastructure cannot support that because it's publicly funded. However, nothing prevents you to collect information that might enable you to perform authentication yourself, as long as such information is publicly accessible and publicly available. If in doubt, and ethical committees will always view and in detail evaluate such applications, if in doubt, I would suggest to talk to the help desk prior to submitting a proposal, and they will be able to advise you on any ethical issues that might arise from the proposed research. I hope that's helpful.
Thank you both, Constanza and Mattia, for the reply. It's extremely, really informative. And Mattia, indeed, I'm fully aware of the ethical issues. And actually, the final aim of the project is not to authenticate, but rather it's one of the aims. The major aim is to help conservatory restorers in their work, and art historian and other specialists. But my thought was rather to what extent such information might be helpful for those other specialists, not us, but for other specialists who might use the data obtained and put in public as a database for their work for authenticity proof or whatever. So I think it was really, really important point that in an application and for research projects, we should keep this aside because it's a matter of complex work of a number of specialists, not only scientists, art historians, conservatory restorers, but also other specialists. And it's a delicate issue, which is not the aim of IPERION HS. And so thank you really for this clarification. I hope it's also helpful for the other participants in the webinar, if they have these thoughts too.
Thank you very, very much, both for the most interesting questions and for the hugely helpful answers of Constanza and Mattia. Now I would like to invite Joan to tell us what her issues with her archival collections are and what questions she would like to ask.
Thank you, JoAnn. I'm just going to share my screen. First of all, I would like to thank the organizers for inviting me to share with you some of the marvels we have at the Malta Notarial Archives. And I would like to start by, in a nutshell, telling you something about the archives themselves, where the documents we're going to talk about were found. Basically, the Notarial Archives were deposited in this building, which is an 18th century building, and they were deposited here after the Second World War. They, as the name indicates, they are legal documents, but apart from legal documents, we have a collection of loose documents which are of a variety in nature. After the Second World War, as I said, they were deposited in this building and basically have been left here to rot up until about 17 years ago. So for a good number of 50 years until a foundation was set up, and the Notarial Archives Foundation, and the foundation started to recruit volunteers and also find private sponsors in order to sort out the building and as much as possible preserve it for future generations. Now, this work was done under the supervision of professionals, historians, and even conservators. And while doing the sorting, we were lucky to also find various personal letters and even ephemeral documents. Now, apart from the Western, we call them Western documents, we were also lucky to come across a collection of what we call maritime documents. And in this collection, there was also this about 50 documents containing Ottoman Turkish script. Now, these documents ended up in this collection because the notary had also the duty to collect evidence as regards a litigation or a court case. And therefore, he was by law bound to keep all the evidence presented. Now, many of these documents are held in volumes, which were presented in cases regarding corsairing activities, corsairing being a licensed form of piracy. And therefore, these letters were, let's say, caught by pirates, corsairs, and then they were forwarded to the local authorities, and they were kept by the notary as evidence. Now, these documents are in multiple forms. Some have been unfolded and are flat and loose. Others, as you can see from the image, were bound as registers in the collection. We also have some of them which are truly unique, which are still logged and wax sealed. They contain certain curious features like these slits at the sides, which are slits obviously due to the disinfestation process, because since they were coming from the east, they needed to be disinfested, and therefore there was this concoction of chemicals which ultimately produce these fumes, and these slits permitted these fumes to penetrate into the paper. The questions as regards our activity are linked with these documents, because we would like to leave them logged as they are, because we think that in their own right, they represent something which otherwise would have been lost to us, how letters were folded, how they were sealed. And my questions as regards this to the scientists are, can we virtually unfold and reveal the contents of logged letters while at the same time conserve them intact? Does a method exist where one could read the contents of the letters without breaking the seal? Would it be possible to see through and distinguish multiple layers? Would it be possible to identify the ink, paper types, paper coating, sizing, and paper folds through this process? Some of the logged letters are not loose, but bound, as I already said, in registers. Does this offer a greater challenge? And last but not least, could the data be compared to the opened letters, which are also in our collection, and perhaps even to similar collections in other countries, such as the Dutch Postal Museum at The Hague? Thank you so much, and I'm looking forward for your answers.
Thank you very much, Joan, for these questions. Now, I think if you could keep on sharing your screen and put up the first three questions, which I would then ask Mattia if he could provide at least partial answers to these questions.
Thank you so much, JoAnn, and thank you so much to you as well, Joan. These are extraordinary letters, and I can imagine that it's quite a challenge to study them, considering that in the state that they are impossible to read. However, one of our questions is whether there are methods, or whether there is a method that might be able to offer us insight into what's written on the pages without actually unsealing them. The answer is, unfortunately, it depends. And it depends on particularly on what the ink is made of. And it also depends a little bit on how tightly packed and how thick these letters are. What we know in terms of the Ottoman papermaking and in terms of the inks that they used is that they predominantly used carbon-based inks. And carbon-based inks can be imaged using terahertz pulsed imaging. This method is available as part of FixLab offer in Paris at LRMH, and they might be able to offer the method and access to the method to essentially see through paper, because paper does not absorb or does not reflect terahertz waves in the same way as carbon-based ink does. Carbon-based ink, namely, absorbs a lot of radiation and therefore will be visible in terahertz images. However, if the ink contains metals, then other methods might be available. And perhaps, Costanza, you could explore what other methods might be available for such inks. I know you have experience of X-ray methods, for example.
Yes, so as properly Matthias said, the problem here is the different signal from the paper and the material to be read as a letter. So in the case of an ink containing a metal, as iron gallic ink, for example, in this case, we can very profitably use X-ray fluorescence mapping, and this will allow to reveal the written part also from the back of the paper. There will be properly a superimposition of signal from the back of the first layer and then from the other layer that is behind, but then it's possible to have an extraction of the different word between the two layers with some imaging processing. In the case of an ink that is based on carbon, this is much more challenging for X-ray method, but nevertheless, it could be worth to apply X-ray radiography because it is possible to have anyhow a little contrast, and this contrast, even though little, can be then further elaborated with imaging processing, try to extract an information that is partially resolved and then related to the letter we would like to read. Also, in terms of experimental setup and try, I would say, because here we are in the regime of challenges question, it is also possible to apply OCT. Within the MOLA platform, we have different type of OCT that can give different type of penetration also within paper if the paper is enough thin. And also the TeraHERS is available in a portable version, so also can be applied in situ.
Thank you.
With respect to the second set of questions, these are typical questions that we normally respond to within the Heritage Macromolecular Lab within IPERION that I co-lead. This is a laboratory that was established specifically to respond to research questions concerning paper, concerning parchment, textiles, and other either synthetic, semi-synthetic, or natural polymers, such as cellulose or paper as a cellulosic material in this case. Islamic paper and Turkish paper has been produced using different paper making techniques than were used in European paper making, and it very often contains high amounts of starch, and it was often polished as well. So on the surface, it might contain gum, such as gum tragacanth, that was later polished. And we can see on the right-hand side that the paper has a nice shine to it. So it would represent what we presume in this particular case is a very typical Islamic paper type. These are questions that can be addressed using various types of spectroscopy, such as near-infrared spectroscopy or infrared, mid-infrared spectroscopy. Tools exist either in fixed lab or in MOLAB facilities that can be used to understand what the paper has been made of. However, there are paper properties that might be of interest to archivists and that cannot be analyzed non-destructively, at least not very easily, so may require some sampling in order to, for example, see what fibers the paper has been made of or how degraded those fibers already are. So a lot of these challenges are quite complex and may require quite a bit of research, which obviously we don't shy away from. I'm just saying that we need a little bit more time to address such complex research questions. With respect to those locked letters that are bound within registrars, the majority of tools that are used for this purpose are reasonably flexible, so can be used on thick volumes, on thick registrars as well. They either have fiber optics attached to them, so they are quite flexible, or the tools themselves are handheld or small enough to be able to fit within a registrar and measure spectra or optical information, even if the material is bound. And then the third question, I would suggest, Costanza, that you address as well, again, if that's all right.
Yeah. So the question is about comparison of analysis conducted within one project with other objects in other projects. So again, from a formal point of view, we can proceed with one project in one place if we are speaking about portable methods. And so if you would like to measure and study different objects in different places, from a formal point of view, you have to apply twice. First in Malta, for example, and then another project in another call in Hague. If the material, if the object, if the letter are transportable, so in the case you may, for example, transfer the letter from one place to another place, in that case, it is possible to have one project in one room, in one site, so that formally we are still fine with the procedures of the project. So these are technicality depending on how the European project is funding this type of proposal.
Thank you so much for your answers. They were really interesting. I'm sure that we're going to follow up on this project because we are really curious to know the contents, and yet we want to, we want to keep their authenticity as much as possible. These can be studied as they are. And even the fact of the sampling of the paper, it's very exciting for us because the Notarial Archives are like a hub where you have all these types of papers, because you had the hands of so many notaries, and they are all buying and supplying their offices with papers coming from all over Europe and the Mediterranean, and even these documents which ultimately ended up with their collection. So this sampling of the paper is also really, really interesting, and we would like also to look into it as much as possible. And I do hope that this project materializes, because this was one of our, on my wish list. I would like to tick it off.
Thank you so much, Joan and Stefan and Mattia and Costanza. I think I will try to draw this to a close, also to open the floor to questions and answers. But I really would like to take a few thoughts away from this, and not only how huge, vast our heritage is, and how it goes from not only paintings and archival material to the monuments and buildings we talked about in the previous webinar. It is vast, but also equally vast, I think, is the offer of transnational access to such a huge variety. I mean, maybe I shouldn't say this at this stage, but when I look at the catalog of what is offered, it is so varied, and it is hugely, each instrument, each technique is supported by the experts in the field. So I would urge you to get together into a multidisciplinary team, talk to scientists before you start asking the questions, but then also talk to the user help desk, because there will be an enormous amount of help which can be given to you to answer really most questions, I think, which we can put as regards our heritage. So thank you very, very much to Joan and Stefan, but very, very much also Mattia and Costanza.
Thank you, JoAnn, our guest moderator for today's webinar. Thank you, our guest speakers, Joan and Stefan, and of course, my colleague Costanza. All that remains of today's program is to invite everyone to attend our next IPERION HS webinar, our next Heritage Science Academy webinar, where we will be joined by the guest moderator, Dr. Marina Martinez de Pinillos Gonzalez, who is going to talk to us about paleontology research services that are available to researchers in fields such as paleontology and paleoanthropology within the IPERION HS research infrastructure catalog. This webinar will be organized on November the 11th at exactly the same time.